All right, good. All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kofi Annan. I am the social justice servant leader for First Baptist Church of Vienna. And today we're going to be having a conversation about the abortion issue, which has been the topic of national discussions for quite some time now, for the last few weeks. And so today we're just going to have another conversation within the church to talk about how it impacts women of color and how we're feeling the impact here locally. So we're going to talk a little bit about the history of how this issue has evolved over the years and what is the long-term impact in our community. So joining me today, I'm going to have everyone introduce themselves, starting with my wife, Shreen.
Good evening, everyone. I am Shreen Manon, and I am a member of the First Baptist Church of Vienna and the Social Justice Ministry.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Minister Rashina Drone. I am, of course, here as the resident millennial and also as a member of the clergy here at First Baptist.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Jackie Hood Martin, and I'm here at the church in the area of discipleship and ministry formation. I'm excited to be a part of this conversation.
Awesome. So for starters, Shreem's going to give us a little quick of a historical background information about how we got here. Oh, before we get started, I should let everyone know that the opinions expressed throughout this program are our personal opinions and not necessarily the reflection of an official point of view of the First Baptist Church of Vienna.
Okay, so some historical context. Roe versus Wade was a landmark legal decision that was issued January 22nd of 1973, in which the U.S. Supreme Court struck down a Texas state statute banning abortion, effectively legalizing the procedure across the U.S. The court held that a woman's right to an abortion was implicit in the right to privacy protected by the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. Prior to Roe v. Wade, abortion had been illegal throughout much of the country since the late 19th century. Since the 1973 ruling, many states have imposed restrictions on abortion rights.
All right. And we should also mention that in 1991, I believe there was another court case where the Supreme Court also updated their point of view on the legality of abortions during the Planned Parenthood versus Casey decision. And the difference between the two cases, the update was that instead of looking at a pregnancy through a trimester point of view, they looked at it from when does the fetus have viability. So same concept of basically restricting giving women the right to have abortions and to make the decisions about the state of the pregnancy up until a certain point. So that was those were the two laws that set the precedent for how abortions were handled in the country. But it seems now that that both of those rulings are going to be upended. It seems like they're primed to be upended because of the leaked draft memo that was leaked a few weeks ago, which obviously sets incredible precedent. So, what do you guys think? So, just going to throw it out there. How do you feel that I guess maybe before we get into the actual abortion issue itself, how do you feel like this? What do you think this leak says about the courts in general? Do you think it says that the courts are partisan, or what do you think?
Let me jump in there for a second, because I'm not mad about the leaks. I think it says more than just what was revealed from the documents being leaked. A lot of it was, for me, about transparency of government. I know that people are upset that things were leaked out, but we did vote for people, to be in office. We pushed for people to be on the Supreme Court, and for the people not to have even some type of level of awareness of what the thought processes are that really do impact the country and how we live and what we do, our health rights and all of those things that are attached to it. It does make people wonder, what are people trying to hide? And so when you think about, what is transparency of government, it really comes down to people knowing what the government is thinking when it comes to making decisions for them, which allows us to make better decisions when it comes down to voting. So I'm not upset about the leaks. I am concerned about what was in those documents, that a person's right to choose could come down to the fact of not having one. But I think people should know, and it would be great at some point if there could be a determination of when should the people know what's being thought about when it comes down to their personal health and well-being and how they utilize their money and make decisions.
And just to kind of go back to your question of whether the court is partisan, it absolutely is, and I think we've seen that over the last I don't know 12, 16 years. People are always going to when the opportunity arises, our presidents, whoever's in office, is going to pick someone who's more aligned with their political ideology. And so I believe that it absolutely is political, and it's unfortunate because the law, what we teach and what we push in this country is that the law, justice is blind, and we should be non-biased, and but when it comes down to it, as human beings, we are all we all have our opinions, and we all want things to go our way, and so their job is to interpret the law in a non-biased way. But I don't think that is.
So you just think that the ruse is over, So, yeah.
Yeah, Pandora's box is open, and partisanship is out the window. In that terms of who benefits from the leak, who benefits from the decision that would be made, and as you stated earlier, Kofi, what is that impact in the greater community, especially the African American community, when it comes down to who can and can't receive certain types of care, having insurance as a whole, where the money comes from. I mean, it's just the Pandora's box has been open with questions that no one wants to answer just by looking at Roe v. Wade and the consideration of overturning it. Like, why now? What's behind that?
I think both of your responses are actually really interesting angles that I don't think even necessarily reflect the majority of the discussions that they've been having seen publicly. So Dr. Jackie, your response was that, you're glad that that the leak happened because it actually shows some transparency. Mm-hmm. And Rashina, you were like, well, we kind of knew this anyway, so.
I think that we get to a place, Kofi, where we stop thinking with emotion. Because when you look at the levels of conversations that are being had, it's very emotional driven. Where's the logic that comes behind it? Where's the reasoning? Where are the dollars and the cents and the reform related to healthcare? And so we get up in arms about, oh my God, there's something bigger than WikiLeaks. Yeah, because this is a really big deal. And so now that it's happening, people want to have a say in, and they were like, oh, let me put my emotions aside for a second. Let's see if we can get into this document and see, how am I going to be affected from paycheck to paycheck? How am I going to be affected in a variety of ways as it relates to my life and how I govern myself? And I think it affects not only the mental health community, but it also affects the healthcare community. And so there are just so many nuances related to the leak, about Roe v. Wade being overturned, that it's going to do some damage in ways that may be irreparable.
Yeah. Do you think of? Sure, I
was going to say, no, that was a great point what Dr. Jackie mentioned about there's so many layers to this, from the different choices you make in your healthcare, the barriers, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but the barriers, especially women of color face in the healthcare system, reproductive issues overall, not even just abortion. It's very, it's a very drastic difference. So,
right. Well, I'm from Texas, and I remember, I guess it was during the pandemic when Texas had already decided that they were going to overturn, Roe v. Wade, and there was a lot of stuff up in arms. And of course, And we may or may not talk about this down the road, but there's some caveats that are in the Texas law that relate to, if a person is raped, if an individual has incest, if they're a victim of incest and all of these kinds of things, then there's no concern or care for how pregnancy occurs. And so when you think about the trauma attached with how it happened, ever before we get to Roe v. Wade, where is the concern for the mental well-being of a young child carrying a child, especially if that, occurred through some form of a means other than consensual sex. And so I think that when we talk about it, people are up in arms emotionally for those very reasons of, well, what about me? The individual, the person beyond the fetus. I'm a person too. So who's caring for me while I'm abiding by the law? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
When the baby is here, who's helping me take care of the baby? Are we up in the ante on TANF? Are we raising the amount of people going to receive on WIC? Do these guidelines change based on, there's so many factors that as a church and as an individual and nonprofit that we help people with. The large scope of it is, what is the impact too on any decision that affects how the community gets involved? The village now has a responsibility that it financially may not be prepared for. So
yeah, we're definitely gonna dig all into all those things that you just mentioned. I think they're all valid points and concerns for women all over the country right now. Let me ask you this. So has your view of the court changed at all because of this? And Rasheen, I think I know what your answer is, but has y'all's view of the court changed because of how this was revealed to us?
I think that the way the leak, I think I kind of lean toward Dr. Jackie's opinion. Like, the leak does not necessarily bother me, because I'm very skeptical of government anyway, because it's all driven by money, in my opinion. It's about whose palms need to be greased, who owes whom a favor, and those kind of things. So I can't say that my opinion of the court has changed, because I didn't have a high regard for the court.
They didn't have too much farther to fall.
Right. First place. Like, I'm not heartbroken over this. It is. To me, it's a typical day in America. Just where we have been politically, and I just feel like we're just on this downward spiral. And there are, there is a remnant of people who would like to, see change for the better. But what we learned from this past election is there is a lot of people who are fine with the way things are going. They're fine with the corruption. They're fine with this governmental overreach, and they want to blame that on one certain party about this governmental overreach. But to me, this is government overreach to try to say what someone can or cannot do with their body. That's patriarchal. It is. It's archaic to me, and I don't know if we'll get into the religious ideology aspect of this, but there's a lot of that at play too that I don't think should come from government.
Yeah. Anyone else have a different view of the court since the leak happened?
No, it's probably about the same, in a sense that for me, it goes back to, I want to know what people are making decisions about on my behalf. And I know that in a county system, in a state system, we can have town hall meetings. We get these state of whatever addresses. We kind of understand and can identify with where a politician is headed. When you think of an entire national court system, then there's less communication with the people below, and knowing what's going on. And I think that this leak helps us understand, or at least is sending the message that the people want to know what you're doing on my behalf, good, bad, or indifferent, just so that we can at least be apprised. We can't do anything at the Supreme Court level as people. We've decided who's going to be there. We know they're going to make the decisions. But at the end of the day, somebody should be saying something from a constituency standpoint of, here's what the people you elected and decided on are thinking, and this is how it might affect you. And as a state, as a county, as a city, here's some things that we're going to do. We're not getting any of that. And so a lot of times we find that government throws things at us and say, "Whoop, there it is, deal with it." It's like, wait, what just happened? So I don't think, my opinion personally has not changed in that regard. It is at certain levels, the higher the level, the less the people below know. And I think that that's just the way that government is structured. So if these conversations lead to the restructuring of people in government, then that might be a worthwhile conversation to keep having.
Yeah. Well, for me, I think it kind of confirmed a little bit more my suspicions about the Supreme Court. I guess I was a little hopeful that the Supreme Court would be above the fray of politics. Not. I know it's not. But maybe there was a little part of me that just kind of remained hopeful that it would be. And this kind of showed that it's not. It's just, they're just as political and messy as Congress or any other branch of government. And which is a shame, because we do need our Supreme Courts to be objective and to not play politics. And this would look like it was somebody in the court was just playing politics, whether it was another judge or a staffer or whatever. Like, someone in there felt like it was okay to do this because they knew it would have caused political waves, and we really don't need that. But I don't know.
I like what you said, and it could be that now you bring a different point to it, because now the other side of my brain is, well, maybe this was the process that they go through. As a lot of lawyers do with certain court cases. It's okay, so this is your view. How would you vote? This is your view. What would you say? This is your view. And they're like, well, is this good for the whole? Is this good for the whole? Then what is good for the whole? You know how this process of elimination, how we walk through. So sometimes it makes you wonder, are they playing games, with the people? Like, oh, this is the right time to submit this out so that it looks like the Supreme Court is tainted, or the Supreme Court isn't for the people, or it's not for the good of the land, and things of that nature. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it all comes down in explanations that are given when, certain documents can officially be released.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see if it changes too between the actual draft and now. I don't think it can change that much, because it seems pretty clear cut how they felt.
Right. Well, maybe that was a way to get the people talking so they could get. Yeah, that's very interesting. How do you balance the scale?
But even if we could weigh in on their decisions, like, they're not supposed to listen to us either. Like,
right. But
they're supposed to look at the case, look at the facts, and then look at the Constitution and make a decision based on what is in the Constitution.
But hadn't that been decided? You raise a great question. I'm sure a lot of us are sitting out there thinking, this has already been decided, so this isn't new. Why bring this up now, and what's all behind it? So it's like, this isn't a new statute. It's already been decided. So is this another way to control people and women's bodies? Is it another way to privatize healthcare? I mean, what's behind all this newness with something since 1973?
And that's a great point, because I would be interested to know, because I know a case has to go through a lot of hoops before they get to the Supreme Court. So how did we even get here? That's my question. How do we get to the Supreme Court when this decision was made, decades ago? And then go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll let you finish the thought.
And then my other thing is, what does that mean? What are the implications for other decisions that we thought were, etched in stone? So
you're not looking at my face, because let's just say, look, what we not gonna do. What we not gonna do.
Hello.
Well, okay. So, Rashida, to your point as to how we got here. So, we should probably have a little discussion right now about the strengths and weaknesses of the Roe versus Wade decision. So I might be in the minority on this call. We didn't have any pre-discussions or whatever, but I'll just tell you my opinion on the decision now, right? Like, I always kind of felt like the Roe versus Wade decision was made on a weak foundation, right? So the foundation of Roe versus Wade decision was that it's a right to privacy, right? And that privacy was rooted in the 14th Amendment, right? Which talks about due process, right? At least that's the implied. Neither one of those clauses are actually written in the 14th Amendment, but the court has interpreted those to mean that, and then it applied that logic to how abortion was ruled on.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like that's a weak argument to be made, right? A, because it was never actually written in the Constitution. Nothing about abortion is in the Constitution. Nothing about the right to privacy is in the Constitution, and nothing about that in due process is in the Constitution. So now to use those three things that don't technically exist anywhere to make the ruling always put Roe versus Wade on shaky ground, and from a legal standpoint. So the Supreme Court to say that you have a constitutional right to something means that it better be a strong precedent in it, right, from the beginning of the country, or written in the Constitution, which didn't really exist, right? So to me, the real problem is our lawmakers could never actually come together and make a law making abortion legal. Not that the courts have decided, yay or nay, but because it's really not in the or change the Constitution to put it in there, which we all know changing the Constitution never happens, right? But to me, those to me were some flaws, or at least weaknesses in the decision, because it was rooted in foundational elements that were kind of weak. But what say you guys?
I'm listening to what you're saying, and for me, it goes back to there was nothing else for them to select because we do amendments. So there could have been something added, but to add something related to women in the 70s would have fallen into that women's rights thing. It would have fallen into civil rights. It would have been given women power that a patriarchal society did not want them to have. And so there's a lot of nuances that are not discussed related to the country as a whole. We would have to really go back and look at the foundations of America in order to be able to really unwrap all of what is happening with Roe v. Wade. But to that end, prior to 1973, what were women doing when they didn't want to keep a child? And so when it comes down to that, two people, Roe v. Wade, her attorney, had conversations about all of this, which got us here. But are there any precedents prior to 1973 that address what could happen? And where does this really fall? It doesn't really fall anywhere, because women were seen as property. And so if we're using women as property, which no longer exists, then it's time for some new statutes. And so I'm wondering if we're actually not us having the right conversations, but I'm wondering if at the court decision-making level is the right conversation being had. So, but that's just my view. Yeah, it raises more questions and concerns than it does get to answers, to quite honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyone else want to? So I just want to. My opinion is that I do believe that the outcome of Roe v. Wade was the correct one, but I think the process and how they got there was flawed and weak, and it was always vulnerable to be overruled. Now, you could also say, well, it's been 50 years, so that's 50 years of precedent that we should abide by, and I could buy that too. I'm not arguing one way or the other whether or not it should be, legalized. Personally, I believe it should be legalized. And I personally believe that the outcome of Roe v. Wade decision is the correct one. But I understand that the process of how you get there legally kind of set itself up to be poked holes in.
Well, I think you could still poke holes going forward. So if we had to deal with a Roe v. Wade in 2022 for the very first time, we still go back to there's nothing there.
Right.
So the foundation would still be flawed because fundamental laws with women as being property are still those that guide that decision, you know, in getting to that. So they came to the 14th Amendment which got to the right to privacy, and whether it's there or not, it's been implied, inferred, or interpreted that way. And so we still are where we were on not really being able to make a choice, which from a country standpoint, maybe the way it was going to be all along, that they wanted hanging in the balance. So they always have the right to come back and make some determinations about what happens with women, and then how all of that leads to finances and funding and money and privatization and a whole host of other things that come from reproduction.
So then I guess that my question then, and this may be not a question for you guys, but a question for our elected officials. How do we get a foundation in the Constitution to ground a decision for a positive decision or a positive result for this? Because like I'm with Kofi, I believe women should have the right, or not even just women, people should have the right to choose what they do with their bodies, particularly when there's other health factors involved, when there's other issues involved, like domestic violence or sexual assault or abuse. On those things, I believe that there should be some type of protection in there for that. And a lot of these states who are who are making these decisions or enforcing these restrictions are totally disregarding that. And to me, that is just it's disgusting.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. So we'll touch on, so later on in the discussion we'll get more into like, so where do we go from here? But what this decision does, for just to kind of clear things up, it basically kicks everything back down to the states.
Right.
To say, states, your elected officials, you decide how you want to handle this, because it's not in the Constitution. The Supreme Court doesn't have a constitutional duty to rule on this issue, right? Mm-hmm. States decide. That's just how that's how the system is set up. So what it looks like is going to happen is that about 26 states right now are poised to make it either illegal altogether or to put really heavy restrictions on it. And so that's going to have a huge impact. There's a good chance that a huge sections of the country, particularly middle America, there aren't going to be any places for people to get abortions, right? They have to travel out of state. They have to travel great distances, maybe even take a plane somewhere because they're so far from anywhere that offers an abortion. And so going back to how this affects women of color, what you can end up happening is that particularly women who don't have the resources to be able to buy a plane ticket to fly to New York or somewhere to get an abortion, now they're more likely to be the ones that will either have to try to find some backwards way of getting an abortion, some illegal abortion, or forced to have a child that they aren't ready to take care of. Mm-hmm. So that has a disproportionate impact on women of color, women in lower economic classes, because if you're wealthy, you're sure, I'll buy a plane ticket, I'll send my daughter off to wherever, or I'll go to wherever, because I can afford that. But if you're not, then, you might end up with fewer choices.
Well, we're a modern society, and I hate to say this, but we've come a long way from the 1970s, and there are so many networks and women who feel as if any choice or opportunity taken away from them to make their own decision, they'll reach into a network. You know, this isn't sadly for them. It's like, oh, I have Cash App, Zelle, and PayPal, and it doesn't ask me what I need that money for. And so when it comes down to people getting resources for what they believe is right for them, I'm gonna tell you, it's a new day. We are not our ancestors. And women today, men today, all think differently about how they should govern their own lives, you know? And so you come to that space of saying, like you said, going to the country, you know, going across the borders, you know, hitching a ride, whatever that may look like. Individuals are going to do what they believe is best for them. And there's some things when it comes to your person that folks are just not going to let the government regulate, you know? And so do we run the risk of losing people, death, you know, by backwoods abortion, or a makeshift plan B pill, or, you know, whatever somebody concocted in chemistry class, you know, from the internet? You know, I mean, this modern society that we live in is very quick and very savvy, you know.
Right. And I think those are things that that these people aren't thinking about. The pro-life people aren't thinking about quality of life for the unborn child or the parent. And so you to me, you can't be fully, you know, wholly full pro-life if you're not concerned about all the lives that are at stake, and you're only concerned about a potential life, particularly if, you know, the abortion is done where the fetus isn't even viable. Yeah, you're thinking about potential life and not thinking about quality of life for everyone involved, and the implications on the greater society. And how that impacts, you know, as you said earlier, how that impacts our economy, how that impacts healthcare and access to health, you know, healthcare and resources on the social services that the country offers. So I think that, you know, people are just really narrow minded in their wanting this potential fetus to be a person on the earth, and not thinking about all, you know, all the implications.
And that's a great point, Rashina, what you just mentioned, because some research I saw that almost half of the abortions that happen across the country are happen to women who are living below the poverty line. So that's a huge impact, you know, to the society. That, to your point, those conversations are probably not happening in that level.
Or they are happening, but people, because I've heard plenty of people make the arguments, but they're just not being heard. They're not listening, because again, they people have tunnel vision when it comes to this. For whatever reason, they are so passionate about this life coming into the world, and you have no regard for it once the life gets here. But you
don't want to pay for it. You know,
right?
Those are the same people who want to cut social service programs and anything that would help support these families once the baby does get here. So
yeah, like I heard somebody say the other day, they're not pro-life, they're pro-birth.
I've seen that too.
It's like, and my question is, why is this so? And why is what other people do that is best for them, why is that so important to you? And so it makes me think, you know, what are the financial or political implications behind their reasoning for, you know, being so adamant about this person having a child that they don't want? Because there's that too. That some people just do not want kids, and what kind of life is that child going to have if they have to grow up in a house where the parent does not want them? And, you know, they say, well, you can put them up for adoption. They still are going to feel like they were not wanted. They were not good enough. So as ridiculous as that may be.
No, that's not ridiculous.
That's
No,
not
I mean,
True,
ridiculous.
very true.
that's real. So
Yeah.
I was actually listening to a podcast just a couple of days ago. It was on a Freakonomics podcast. If you guys are familiar with that, there was a professor that did a study about what he termed unwanted babies, and linked that to the abortion issue, and linked it also to crime levels. And there was a lot of theories as to why crime dropped in the late 90s. And he actually associated that drop. He attributed 50% of that drop to the fact that abortions became legal, and so there were less unwanted babies. Of course, it's controversial, right? But his point, at least in theory, and I haven't actually read the study, but it was deemed credible by a lot of people. The theory is that if there are less babies that aren't wanted, these babies don't live quality lives, right? They don't necessarily get the attention, the resources, the education, and everything that a wanted child gets, because maybe the mother knows that she's not financially or emotionally ready to take care of that child, and she knows that, right? So when that baby comes along, then that baby just lives a rougher life, right? And so they're more likely to go down the path of crime. It's just a theory. I'm not, it comes with a lot of controversy, especially when you overlay that with race and everything else. But I thought it was interesting. I thought it was an interesting look at how we overlaid those two trend lines.
Right. Well, I think that you probably just tied and connected some dots. People of color, African American people, have a tendency to look across spectrums. We look at our community, we look into other communities, and we do the checks and balances, and we weigh it all. Whereas for me, I figure that white people sometimes only see through their lens, and they don't necessarily see the consequences of decisions and actions that impact them. Now, whereas the government can promise you this and promise you that, and you'll get more aid and all of these things, and an African American woman is made up her mind and she says, I'm going to get an abortion, it's done. Whereas a white person on the other side of the tracks gets promised a couple of things, and they may be swayed just a little, because now they feel like they belong. They feel like they're a part of something. They feel like someone is giving them hope. And we know just out of life history that hope doesn't always look like we think it's going to come. But I say all that to say this. This is a great segue to probably something we're going to talk about later, about the Carolina 9, as well as what happened in New York. Because when you think about unwanted babies, unwanted children, parents who cannot raise, statistics do show that there is a correlation between individuals who are not wanted, not reared properly, don't have love and attention and affection, and they start to formulate their own ideas and concepts and opinions about things, i.e. why replacement theory is such a very big conversation. And the foolishness of it all is that people who don't know better believe this. And so it's those types of conversations in backwood circles that lead toward decisions that are being made that impact the masses, namely us, in a negative manner.
Yeah.
That's an excellent point, Dr. Jackie. I didn't resonate until you said it about how in some cases a white woman will have, may have some options, right, that aren't presented to an African American woman. So that I really like that point she just made.
Well, I was listening to watching a video of this woman who she was on. She fell on some hard times, got a divorce, ended up being homeless, and getting pregnant, and she had 3 kids, and she's a single mom. She had all these obstacles. And then she talked about how she was able to overcome those obstacles, go to college, graduate, and all of these things. But she pointed out the fact that because she was a white woman, and she realizes that even in those types of circumstances, and she was going to social service, she was on all the government assistance and all of that. She realized that even with those circumstances, she still had an amount of privilege
Mhm.
that afforded her to be able to make it out of where she was. And so, and to that point, a lot of a point you made earlier, a lot of them do not realize that, you know, we have this bootstrap mentality in this country where you pull yourself up by your bootstraps when you guys actually have boots.
Right.
Are people who
don't have any.
Right. Like all God's children don't have traveling shoes,
Right.
you know? So it's one of those things where we, you know, really have to sit back and take a really close look at, you know, numbers don't lie, you know, and whereas the statistics do show, and I know that as we get to the space of being able to show some of those statistics, that there are more people on Social Security and welfare than Black people. But to let media tell the story, it's all us. And we're not even that much of a percentage of the country. But for some reason, our presence is still a threat, you know, to white America. And that is just, I can't even imagine why that would be so. To teach your child that Black people are taking your jobs, to teach your child that Latino people are taking your jobs. During the pandemic, our crops and our grocery stores were not filled. I didn't see any people that didn't look like Latinos or like us running out there. Once they said that they were going to deport people, who went out there to tend the crops? Nobody, which is why we had a shortage in grocery stores. You know, so don't say what people are taking when you yourself don't even want the work that they were doing. You know, but it makes big headline news and it's the thing, and all of a sudden it's a buzzword. So it's crazy to think that, you know, abortion or not abortion is going to change the way people think about how this country is run.
Yeah. Want to focus in a little bit about if this court case actually pans out the way it seems like it's heading. What are some of the other threats to other laws that or other services that could potentially happen? So I know that one of the other implications from this is that this could also potentially be a threat to other types of reproductive health services. Any thoughts as to what are the other implications from this?
I think just maternal health services in general, because we know that African American women are disproportionately treated differently in the healthcare system. So not only just abortion, but I think all maternal health services, maternity care, we're not always taken seriously when we go to the doctor. So I think that screenings for reproductive cancers, I think all of those things all kind of fall into play there.
You know, the frequency of the care could also be changed depending. Oftentimes we don't see the bias right away. It's like, how often are you supposed to go in? And will I be able to schedule those appointments? Or would there be too many appointments that a person can't make it because who can take off work for that type of care? And so those things happen, but also the mental health, you know, that comes from mental health is also impacted by maternal health. You know, readiness levels, depending on your age, the wear and tear physically that it has on your body, you know, being able to keep up, you know. So there are just a lot of those two, specifically mental health and maternal health, also play, you know, or could come into effect of who gets quality mental health, and are certain kinds of mental health even covered. You know, for a lot of times people think, oh, it's a specialty. So if you can't afford regular health care, you're surely not going to be able to afford specialty health care.
Yeah, so those are some good points. Hadn't really thought about from the mental health care standpoint, but yeah, it's definitely a ripple effect.
Yeah, one other to consider is academic health. When you think from an educational perspective, young kids, you know, prom babies, date rape, all of those things, is there quality health care for young people? And does that fall under the health care of the parent up to age 22, 23, 24? And if that parent doesn't have health care, where does a young mother, a young parent get health care today? And how, and what does that look like for them? Because there's a lot of wraparound services that need to happen. You're young and you're a child yourself. And in this society, where do you find help and get health care and the things that you need? So Am I going to be able to finish school? Can I go to school? Do I have to go to a pregnancy school? You know, in Chicago, we work with schools that had, you know, we had to help create on the community college level, you know, classrooms and spaces for young pregnant mothers so that they could finish their education, because without it, where would they and how would they be able to take care of a child that they were told they need to have? And so I'm not real certain that we are ready, the church, education, society as a whole, for what wraparound care looks like when choice is no longer on the table.
Yeah. And even another extreme that come out of this, I know at least in one state, in Louisiana, there was one lawmaker who proposed that there be that abortion could become could be characterized as a murder. So that's one way that this could even, you know, now we're not just banning it, but now we're criminalizing it, and now we're to the most, you know, extreme, so someone could be convicted of murder. And when do you actually, where do you draw that line? Is that line drawn in week 1 or week 2 of a pregnancy? Are you considered, you know, you potentially, where do you go from fertilization to actually having a viable baby? And at what point does it become murder? You know, like this is very, the Pandora's box is open at this point.
Right. But the question is, who gets criminalized? And Rashina and I have had some conversations about that as well. What is the role of the father in this equation related to pregnancy? And what laws, especially if there's a serial father, we'll go with that, you know, father more than one child by multiple women, where is the responsibility there? Or does all of this onus fall on the female? So there are lots of things that have just not been discussed openly enough, I guess, for some of us.
And this is I'm pretty sure another conversation, but this country's obsession with criminalizing everything. It is absurd. Like, people cannot live, and it goes back to, again, I know it goes back to people's, I will say, their philosophies, their on what they, and their ethics, their morals and ethics on what they believe is, you know, right or wrong, and it is based solely in one, you know, tradition. And but this obsession that we have with criminalizing everything and putting people in jail and punishing people, it's weird. For lack of a better word, it is just really,
it's not that weird.
Right, because it's driven by dollars. Yeah,
I've seen in some, I'm not sure which state it is, but some women are being prosecuted and charged after having a miscarriage or stillbirth.
And I was gonna get there. Like, what if a woman, you know, she's, for whatever odd reason, she does something that causes a miscarriage? Is there some implication that she could be charged with murder or manslaughter for having a miscarriage? Like,
but a miscarriage is not her fault, because it goes back to all of the things that we're talking about that are not in place. You should not stand for a certain period of time once you get to a certain level. I've never been pregnant, but I've counseled and coached people who have. And from what I understand, there's certain lengths of time where you should stop work, but who can stop work? There's certain length of time where there's certain jobs you should not be doing, but who can do that? There are certain types of healthcare that you need. And if I don't have the ability in my lower uterus to carry a child full term, but I can't be on bed rest because I need to work, where do medical professionals play a part in telling lawmakers you're out of your mind?
Right.
Ideology trumps everything. Logic, decency, compassion.
Right.
It's ideology first, everything else second.
Right. But it is law that makes people fall in line, which is odd that the law is being used against the American people. That if it's a law and you break it, then you're subject to it no matter what your condition is. And I think that is fundamentally flawed and wrong.
Yeah. And some other unrelated things that can actually suffer from this ruling. The right to gay marriage, which is also based on this precedent. Also the interracial marriage. There are other things that are based or rooted in this foundation of right to privacy. That if you strike this down, there's potential for this conversation to expand into other areas as well. So,
well, then it gets personal because what you just said about loving actually comes down to white fear. And then that in itself is pushing people's ideology on other people in that regard. So if you're making a law that interracial relationships should not exist, then but I want to procreate. So now you got people in a catch-22. We want to be married, but we're mixed. But we don't want to have an abortion. We want to have babies. But because they're not white babies, they're mixed babies, now we got a problem. And so ultimately, at some point, you start to see through the smoke screen. Is this really the whiting of America? The beginning of the whiting of America?
I'm not even gonna go there.
I'm just saying this is a conversation for another day. But I'm just saying this is a conversation for another day. So, because all of these things do make you wonder what's the driving force behind some of this. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's very deep. Very deep.
I think it can be argued, just as patriarchy is just kind of pushing it pushes a lot of the law and what we do and how we govern this country. Racism does too. Like it when the forefathers put together the Constitution, like it was just a bunch of white men writing down how they wanted to live, what they wanted, what their ideals were, not taking into account other ethnicities, other genders, like not taking any of those things into consideration. And
we weren't even fully human, so
right. Well, they know now.
So I think it's fair to say that some of this stuff can be pushed or comes down to the need for certain white people to remain in power, or their desire for white people to remain in power, which is really kind of odd because considering white people are not the majority on the earth. But there's this idea that they are the majority and things they need to stay on top.
So is Roe v. Wade really a racial issue then? I mean, this conversation has me really thinking about some of the things we've been talking about, and is the browning of America behind all this? That's all.
Yeah. Hey, I want to make sure we get through a couple more things here, because I do want to spend a little bit of time to talk about the shooting that happened in Buffalo. We have to talk about that, even though that wasn't the original intent of our conversation, but it's obviously very moving and historic in its own sad right. But Rashida, you had talked a little bit earlier about the overlap between how the religious aspect, the religious angle to this. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of finish your thought as to how are your feelings about this with the religion.
Okay, so to go back to the founders of America, when they were writing the Constitution, their big thing was they were over here and not able to worship the way they want, not able to have a say in the government because the government was across the water. And so they found the Bill of Rights. You have the freedom to worship the way you want, to just live your life the way you want. And so in their minds, they were thinking, oh, well, everybody's going to be a Christian. So, we don't have to specify that, we're a Christian nation. And so, I think people have this skewed view of America that we are a Christian nation. And that is not the case, because the Constitution says we can't be, just by
Right.
just by the
The
nature of
money
the
says so, though.
So,
It's on the money.
I wish.
but when we get down to it, and a lot of these values, or these, these things that we're pushing, we're anti-abortion, or we're anti whatever they are. It's because you're a Christian, you're a good Christian, and we want to push our Christian, but or even anti-gay marriage. Like, you cannot force the nation to be Christian and to follow Christian precepts, because that's unconstitutional. But these very liberties that you say that the forefathers wanted to have in this country, you're fighting against that, people's right to decide how they want to live their life. And so I think that all of that should not push political views. The evangelicals there should never have been an aligning of any type of political party with religious affiliation. Like, it's unconstitutional. Like,
Right.
I don't know how else to say that. It's like they don't get it, but this is not a Christian nation. I'm sorry.
So that's interesting that you say that, because in my dissertation, I actually opened up with Josiah Bartlett's prayer, simply because the nation originally was founded on Christian principles, and they have gotten so far away from those concepts, and that prayer was actually a part of everything that early leaders did. And then there became the separation of church and state. But it was in his prayer, let's see, Josiah Bartlett, a military officer, signer of the Declaration of Independence, judge and governor of New Hampshire, in his call for a national day of prayer and fasting, called upon the people of New Hampshire to do this: confess before God their aggravated transgressions, and to implore his pardon and forgiveness through the merits of mediation of Jesus Christ, that the knowledge of the gospel of Jesus Christ may be made known to all nations, pure and undefiled religion universally prevail, and the earth be filled with the glory of the Lord. And I found that to be extremely interesting, that in the beginning, there was a belief that this new nation could really be pure, to be governed by the things that were right, and that there was a balancing of the scales between right and wrong. Why, lawyers and judges still put their hands on the Bible, and doctors as a sacred oath. But we have moved so far away from seeing a creator, because of so many other things, as not being the way to govern ourselves as good and right and pure people. And so it's like the people are running wild, and the nation is on fire, and it's being stoked with gasoline rather than fire, because everybody wants to be right. Nobody wants to take ownership or be found wrong. So yeah, I find what you're saying, Rashina, to be extremely valuable in the context of how do people of faith weigh what's happening and still remain faithful.
Mm-hmm.
I've been saying this forever. If you study, if you just, and you don't even have to do in-depth study of the life and the ministry of Jesus. If Jesus were physically walking this earth today, like he would be a liberal. Like, he caught this woman in the act of adultery, and he attacked the accusers, not her. He fought against the accusers, those who were trying to criminalize her. So and those things, he went into he was against capitalism in the temple. The people, he turns the tables over because they're in there cheating people out of money. So like, and again, it's always the religious people. Like, Jesus had a problem with religious people, and Jesus was a devout Jew, but he had a problem with people who were hypocrites, who said one thing and practice another. Jesus was about love and looking at the whole of a thing. He wasn't against taxes. He wants you to pay your he wants you to pay your taxes. You know what I'm saying? But he to me, he was about the whole of a matter, not just tunnel vision. Oh well, the Torah says this, so this is the way it has to be. He interpreted the law. This is what God's intention was when this was written in the Torah, and this is how we should govern ourselves. And we don't. I think we are far from, Dr. Jackie, we are far from that. You're very good on the religious, the what we should, what the rules and the regulations are of Christianity, but we are very low on the how we should treat people. How would Jesus, what really would Jesus? I said I was going to preach this sermon one day. What would Jesus?
With the emphasis on would.
What would he do? Because we're not doing that as a universal church.
Right. Well, I tell you, she's saying some stuff that really does make sense. And I guess for the people who stop by this and watch it who aren't Christian, for those of you who don't follow in the faith, but you just happen to come by, it's the same thing in business. It's like a bell curve. How far can you be from what's really right and wrong in your company before you recognize you have to change course of action, And so I think that it puts us all in that space of saying we have to take ownership, just as we're challenged and charged to, and be accountable, for everything that we say and do in the lives that we lead and that we lead others toward.
Yeah. I feel when it comes to religion and government, I feel we just kind of pick and choose when we want to be like super Christian and we're, and just kind of ignore, everything else. So it's very selective Christianity. And I think it's always been that way. The same people who were writing about Christianity were also enslaving other people, and
right.
And so, yeah, it's very selective as to how we view Christianity. Dr. Jack, I know do you still have a hard stop, or do you think
I texted him and told him I would get on in a little bit.
Okay. All right. So really quickly, where do we go from here? I'll give my quick thoughts and I'll turn it over to the rest of you all to, I feel like there's a right answer to this and there's a realistic answer to this. The right answer to me is Congress needs to pass some legislation that codifies Roe v. Wade, right? That's what should happen. I know there have been an attempt just recently. It didn't go anywhere. But I also feel like that's the reality of the situation. Politically, honestly, I don't believe either party wants to actually pass legislation at this point. The Republicans, because they feel like this is exactly what they always wanted. The Democrats, in a kind of a twisted way, they also want this because it galvanizes their population. It galvanizes their base. It gets them excited. It gives a lot of women a reason to vote for Democrats. So they don't necessarily want to solve anything, particularly not right before the midterms when they were drowning in the polls. So I feel like realistically, they're actually kind of happy with the way this turned out. So I don't know that we actually get anything solved anytime soon because anger drive votes. That's the sad situation of how our politics works. But any other thoughts as to
that point, or you're talking about how the Democrats are happy with the way things are? I think one solution could, and again, I don't know how realistic it is. I don't think it's very realistic, but having term limits for people in Congress, because there are people. We need younger voices in Congress. Not me, but no, I'm not going to get a clipboard.
Start the petition going
and start a petition. I'm not doing any of that.
What district you in?
But I think there needs to be younger voices in Congress who and that will say, hey, you know what? Maybe we should vote against our own interest and not be here for as long as we want to be here. I think that is bad for any organization, any entity to have the same leadership forever. Like even with the Supreme Court, like I think that to me that's odd to have somebody say, "Hey, you get to make decisions until you're, old and and
Whatever you want.
No,
there's
I thought
nothing
it was a marriage. It's literally until death do us part.
right. And there's nothing wrong with having wisdom, and with that comes with age. But I think that also what is good about youth is that we're always kind of going against the previous generation. And I think that change is good, because as a country, we're always growing. We should always be growing. We should always be changing and always trying different things, because we've been doing the same thing forever now, and it's still broken. And so I don't know that there's ever a way to fix it, but there should always be an attempt to fix what is not working. And obviously the way things are now are not working. But term limits in Congress, younger people eligible to lead the nation, sometimes we may get a little wild out, outside the box with our ideas, but I think that that's necessary in order to see positive change. So
gotta push beyond. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I think that we should just get ready. When you talk about Kofi earlier, you said that if this gets pushed back or pushed to the states, I think the states need to be ready. And that means the everyday citizen. What do we do, state by state, city by city, county by county, block by block, church by church? Because what it comes down to is, will we have a plan in place for whatever decision is made? And I think that we should be looking at, how do we prepare people for the decisions, what those conversations look like. Where do we help people find resources that they need in order to be able to help them manage or cope with whatever decision is made? But then also at a real base level, where are we going to stand in the gap? We can do a lot with voter registration. We can, train and prepare people to get ready. But if their voices are constantly silenced and people with money have the bigger stick and they're making the loudest noise, then oftentimes people just still can't get what they want, but they're also stuck with living with choices and decisions that have been made for them. So I'm saying that people get ready to work. And that's what it's going to come down to, that we need to be in that space of having at least a plan of action that can be rolled out across cities or states or across communities that would allow them to be able to not only address and have their talking points if they're ever in a place where they can do that, but then also be ready to hit the ground running with support and supplies and formula and diapers and all these other things, counseling sessions. Because the reality is, we can talk about it all day, but whenever the decision is made, there's going to be some work. And so how do we get the people ready to work and serve?
Everyone raised really great points. I don't really have much to add, but to Kofi's point, I hope, I'm still hopeful, but a little pessimistic that Congress will pass anything. So to Dr. Jackie's point, we have to get ready, boots on the ground, galvanize, to figure out how we're going to support our community when this happens. Because I don't know how much that conversation has happened about what you just said about being prepared. I don't know that. I think that the conversations have been more about either for or against, but not, okay, so how do we fill in those gaps? Because something's going to happen. So we definitely need to be prepared.
Yeah, the funny thing is, for Black people, we're going to do what we've always done. We're going to galvanize. We're going to have a baby shower. We're going to show up there. We're going to be at the church. We're going to have a church shower. We're going to get the men to come around the young men. We're going to help him learn how to be a good dad. And we're going to do what we've always done. So in some ways, at that level, it does not affect us, because we've always been a village. We just get more of us to be a part of that village. Whereas other communities, it may impact them just a little bit more, because they're not new to this. We're not new for sure. For some others, they may be new to how the community rolls itself out, because we've come alongside women and young boys for generations. Yeah. Back to slavery. This is what we've always done.
On that note, I would like to segue into the Buffalo shooting briefly. I know we're short on time, But this is what we've always done. Like you're the words that you just stated there, Dr. Jackie. Seems like this is what we've always done, whether it be mass shootings and racism. This seems like this is what we've always done. Am I wrong? Like, what are we doing here as a country? What is going on? Where are we heading in a certain direction? Is this, like I posted, a statement on Facebook a day or so after the Buffalo shooting, and someone replied to me that, like, this is kind of par for the course. I'm kind of summarizing here. This is America. This is what we do. Should we be appalled? Are things getting worse? What are your thoughts? Are we heading in a certain direction? I feel like we're heading in a certain direction, but that post just kind of reminded me, maybe we're not. Like, maybe this is just it.
This is very much on brand. White coming into Black spaces and terrorizing the community. We've seen it we've seen in Tulsa, we've seen it in Rosewood, we've seen it in Wilmington. We've seen this play many times. And so I can't say this is where we're headed. Do I feel like things could get worse? Absolutely. I absolutely feel that way. When we saw people, again, going back to this past election, there are a lot of people who feel like the young man who went to Buffalo to kill these people. They feel like, they are losing their control, that they are being replaced, that they are, that this country is turning browner, and they are slowly becoming a minority. And so that need to hold on to that power, I don't think that dies down anytime soon. I think that, we can try to slow it down with, education and, and reconciliation, and trying to have these conversations and meet in the middle. But no, I don't think that we're headed in I don't think we're like going backwards. I just think that we've done that we're this is par for the course, and that something needs to change. I know we have Second Amendment rights, but to me, guns are, they were created to kill people, or not to kill people, they were created to kill. And people have abused them, and then you couple that with, again, the racism that is just in the DNA of America, and this is what you get. White people trying to hold on to power and being violent. I can't think of a time where they haven't been violent. Unfortunately. And I realize that's a generalization. But when we get down to, the patterns don't lie. I will say that.
Right.
We can, try to take everything on an individual basis, but when you see a consistent pattern, it's the same type of, the same demographic of person committing all these mass shootings, and nobody does anything about it. We just say, oh, we're going to send our thoughts and prayers, and then we move on and wait till the next thing happens.
Yeah.
So these conversations kind of all tie in together for me, in a sense that you think about, as Rashina just said about the demographic of person who's doing the shootings. It kind of heightens the understanding and awareness that this is what we've been trying to tell y'all. You know what I'm saying? It's like, this is what we've been saying to you. We're not out here bothering people. We are out here living our lives, doing what we do. But living our lives is bothering you because someone has taught you that us being free, us living our lives, us advancing and doing our own thing is problematic. But I guess that people forgot that the slaves that they stole from the continent were not ignorant. They were horse traders. They were, mathematicians, and they were astronomers, and they were educators, they were doctors, they were individuals who already came with an acumen. And so you're trying to keep down a people who were already destined to rise. And so for me, some of that argument related to, they're trying to take over, or it's too many of us. They're not more of us. You know what I'm saying? They're not people trying to break into America, that look like we look. And so some of that conversation, I remember watching Selma, and my nieces asked me this question about, why were they beating them and why did they want Dr. King dead? And I quickly referred to them to the scene of them marching over the bridge and trying to have freedom. But on the other side of the bridge, there was a white police officer talking to a young white boy about the same thing. This is why we do what they do. And as long as they keep trying to be free, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. And that gets passed down from generation to generation. So as much as we talk about turning the other cheek and freedom and just living peaceably among men, there are another group of people who've been taught something different, that our presence is bothersome because we are no longer here for the purpose that they brought us. Their issue is not really with us. This is my personal opinion, and I'm putting that first. Their problem is with Abraham Lincoln. And until that gets resolved, white people and people of color outside of being Black Americans have to see why we keep pushing the slave narrative, why it's important to keep telling that story. If one more white person says, why y'all have to always talk about slavery? Because in 2022, the president just passed a no hanging bill. That's why. That message is not for us. We've taken ownership that y'all have a problem with us, but other people won't take ownership with their problem with us. So it's going to be this vicious cycle continuously over and over and over again. And I know everybody didn't feel that way. So this is not an attack on white people who watch us and this, that, and the other. I'm simply stating that things keep happening because other people won't talk to their people like we talk to our people, and take a stance. Timothy McVeigh and a whole bunch of other things was a wake-up call. Nobody did anything. And it's been continuing to escalate. Sandy Hook. We can talk about all the incidences, but until people check their kids or let them know that they were wanted, which goes back to our previous conversation, that they were loved, they're just, it's a whole cycle of things that are conversations that are happening in people's homes that are leading to these dialogues and these outbursts in society that we're seeing. We can fix white America. They have to do that.
Absolutely. Any closing thoughts for you?
No, it's hard to follow. Dr. Jackie. There were so many nuggets in there I was processing as Dr. Jackie was talking, and the last thing you just said is they have to fix white America. That's not something that we can do. So spot on with everything that everyone said.
Yeah. Well, we are out of time. This has been an incredibly rich conversation. I know we have to have a little more time to talk about the Buffalo shooting. It was difficult to split the time with both of these really deep conversations that just kind of go on for hours, honestly, because there's so many layers there. But really appreciate everyone taking the time out to participate in this conversation. I definitely would like to do this more often. And so we're looking forward to having more conversations in the future. So we just kind of talk amongst ourselves.
Get some more people in the dialogue.
Yeah. Most definitely. But thank you again. And until next time, we will see you.